So in this tutorial we're going to look at some of the 3D options in Photoshop's 3D workspace, and you'll find as you're experimenting in the 3D workspace that you'll become more confident in it, and to be honest, I still don't find it very easy to work around, but I'm becoming more familiar the more I play with it. So let's get started. Let's create a new document, and to create a new document I'm going to Control N, Command N, and let's just set it up at that 1000 pixel width, height 720, resolution 72, and I'm just going to make my background just this AC color, which is just a mid-gray, and say okay, okay. Now I need to get some text on there, so let's click on the text, and I'm just going to type my name, and I've already had a bit of a play. I'm using this font called Harlow Solid. I think it's a standard system font, and I've actually played around with the tracking in the letters to get the letters actually joined. So you can see I've got -90 between the E and the L, and then the same between the M and the E, just so that it's all joined together. Making sure that your text layer is selected. Let's go into 3D and let's create new 3D extrusion layer from selected layer, and it'll ask me if I want to switch to the 3D workspace, and I'll just click yes. So this brings up the workspace. The workspace, all these different options fly around. First of all, let's just look at this view. This is actually a secondary view. To bring this up, if you click on view, show, and then you can click on secondary view, and that will either move it away or bring it back. And basically this shows me the different view types. So you can see this view here is actually from the top, and this view is from the side, and this is the base. So this is like the ground, so to speak. And at the moment the text is floating on top of the ground, and we're looking at it as though that's from the front. This is from the top angle, and if I wanted to, I can toggle between my views here. So that's pretty cool. Just to explain the palettes that come up, the 3D panel, which is over here, has all the different components of the 3D scene. So these are all the things that are sitting in your 3D scene. You've got the environment, the scene, the current view, the light source, and then of course the actual object, which is my text here. And if you click on these different components in your 3D scene, you'll see that different properties come up over here in the properties panel. And these are the different things that we can manipulate to create different effects with our 3D text. So whenever you're wanting to modify something, you need to click on the actual element in the 3D panel itself. First of all, we're going to just have a bit of a play around with the view itself. So let's just click on current view. And if I just click and drag on the workspace, you can see I'm actually just rotating the view of my object. So it's staying on that plane there, and I'm just creating like a different view of the object. And I'm just going to undo that because it's easier. Now if I want to actually move Mel around, I need to click on Mel, and now if I click and drag, you can see I'm actually dragging it along the axis, and these little arrows come up, and the little arrows do different things depending on where you've got your cursor position. So here I can scale the size. Oops. Here I can move it along the axis. Oops, that's moving it back, moving it up, and moving it sideways. Now, I can also do that by clicking on the coordinates here, or I can change the coordinates of the actual object. So you can see I can move it around here on the X, Y, or Z, and you can see here that I can scale the dimensions, or I can change the angle. And what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to flip this on its back so that it's lying on the ground instead of sitting up on the ground, because it doesn't really sit up on the ground very nicely. So I'm just going to type in here 90, and what's actually happened is you can see here in the view here from the top, I'm now looking at it from the top, and this is what it looks like from the side. Oops, let me just tab to, oops, get out of that. And what I can then do is I can then go to my view, and I'm just going to then click and drag and rotate to change the view of the object itself. So now what I'm doing is I'm viewing it from an angle like this, and this is how I'm going to render it, something similar to that. So let's click back on Mel and let's have a look at some of the different properties that we can change. So you can see here we've got the shadows. So that's your cat shadows inside the text, and that's your car shadow, so that's the background over here. You can see here I've got a different extrusion depth, so that's how deep the actual extrusion is, and I'm just going to reduce that down to around about 100. And there are different shape presets that you can actually use. Whoops. So you can actually click on any of those and create a specific shape preset that's already applied. This next one along here is the deformation, or you can actually basically change your twist or taper, and that's a bit fun. To have a bit of a play with as well, or you can twist it, which is kind of cool for different objects. So I'm just going to reset those back to 0. And then of course we've got what's called the cap, and the cap is actually this facial bit, so it's like the face of it that's sitting on the top, and we can actually bevel that, or we can put a contoured bevel, and you can just have again a bit of a play around with the different settings here to just see what happens with the different options that we have. The other thing that we have is we actually have what the properties, or the material properties of the object itself. So if you think about this as like a wireframe that you're sitting like a specific fabric over, or a material over the top of, what we can do is we can play around with these different material types as well. So to change all the materials, you've got different sections. So you've got the front inflation, front bevel, the extrusion, which is that lengthy bit there, the back of it, and the back inflation. And to change all those together, if we shift click, we'll make sure the first one's selected and hold down shift key and then click all through those. We can select them all at once. And then what we can do is we can go into materials here, and we can actually like choose different materials to work with. And some of them are great, some of them not so amazing. And I'm just going to work with this kind of chromy looking one. And if you go through the tutorials that you can find on the internet, some of them will show you how to do like really cool kind of glass effects and things like that. You can go in and you can change these different colors here as well. So if I wanted it dark, or if I want to put a tone on it, and say okay. And then of course you can, increase things like the shine, or the amount of reflection that's on there. The opacity, and then the refraction I think is to do with the base. So I'm just going to reduce that shine and increase the reflection. And then come back to Mel. Now the other thing I'm going to play around with is, we've talked about coordinates there. The other thing I'm going to play with is light, and at the moment it's got what's called an infinite light source on it. And if I just move that out of the way so you can see here when I go to the light and click on the properties of the light, I can have the shadow, turn that on or off. I can have a more intense light or a less intense light, and I can adjust the shadow, the definition of the shadow as well. The other thing I can is I can change the position of the light source. So if I want to change that slightly, and then just reduce the intensity of that light source down. And if I come into my layers, I can kind of get a bit of a sense of what it's looking like by just clicking on that background there. Let's come back to the texture. Now I'm going to add another light source in here. So let's have a click on the new spotlight. Now I haven't had much success with this spotlight. I must say I'm finding it very confusing to be able to move it around. You can change the, and actually if I go to the properties, which is here, You can see here again, you can have an additional shadow. Now we don't want an extra shadow, so let me just turn that extra shadow off. And you can see that if I click on various parts of that light source, I can actually change it. So I can move the light source. So it's on the Z-axis, which I don't want to do. Oops, I can rotate it. There we go. I want to move it along the Y-axis. And I kind of want the light source coming from the same direction as the other light source. And I just want to click now and drag it. Just clicking and dragging it. And then what I can do is I can click on these sections here and I can change the different angles. Oops. On the hotspot angle. That's not really doing much for me here. I just really want to add like a little bit more light coming from that source there. And I can actually change again the intensity of it, just to reduce that down again. And just have a look there. Now obviously that's sitting on a grey background, which doesn't really do that much for it. I can actually go in and change the colour of it. So let's just come back to our properties and our 3D. Where's our 3D workspace? Oh no, I need to be in my layers. Click on the text. And let's go into the text and into these materials. And let's just have a look at some different colours. Don't think I want in red. Maybe this nice blue. And say OK. And so now I've got this nice blue on it, and maybe I'm not that fussed. I think that you need to put a background on it. No, I'm just going to take it back to what it was. I'm just going to undo. There's my history. And I'm back here with the colour, and maybe what it is that I don't like is I don't really like the cap that I've put on it. So I'm just going to change that contour back. And maybe take a bit of the so it doesn't look quite so cheesy. And there I've got a kind of cool 3D piece of text. Now the final stage of this is to render it. Now rendering can take quite a significant bit of time. Actually, before I do that, let's just put a gradient overlay. Oh no, I don't want that. Let's put a gradient overlay on that background, and I think I just need to unlock that and then put an effect on it and do a gradient overlay. And you can see just that white to grey kind of gives it a cool effect. And have a bit of a play around. Maybe make it say that's okay. And I'm just going to make a radial and just reverse that. And make it bigger. And just reduce the opacity on it. And let me just change that. Say OK. And say OK now. I've kind of got a bit of a highlight happening with the gradient in the background as well. And I'm pretty happy with that. So back to the render. If you need to render this, which is to basically produce it out as your 3D image, you need to click on 3D. Oh, you need to have the text selected, sorry. 3D, and then we click on render. Now the rendering process can take some time. And I've just zoomed in just so that you can have a look, and just let's talk about the suitability of this to use it as a logo. Now, one of the points of having a great logo is that it's scalable. And you can see here as I've enlarged it up, this isn't particularly scalable. It's got it's very pixelated. So there's kind of a limited use for this type of text in what we're doing in terms of creating a logo. It's cool to have a bit of a play with, make some 3D shapes and spaces, but in actually using it for a logo, yeah, maybe not so applicable. Maybe Illustrator's going to give us a better kind of finish to be able to have something that's more scalable and usable across a wider range of applications. This is kind of cool if you wanted to do some motion graphics or if you wanted to do some animation with it as well, which you could actually do. Hope you have found this helpful and look forward to seeing your results. I'm just rendering so you can see what happens with this, and you can see that that's now started the rendering process. It's got quite some time to take, so I'll pause again and let you have a look at it at the finish. And finally, here we have our image that has been fully rendered.